Welcome back to last video before bed. Today we'll be reading people's creepiest experiences they had while home alone. Let's go. So, I have to share this creepy experience I had while home alone last summer. It started as a pretty typical Friday night. I had been looking forward to a relaxing evening, binge watching my favorite show and treating myself to some pizza. I ordered from my go-to place and of course, I was ridiculously hungry and eagerly anticipating that cheesy goodness. I settled in on the couch, the aroma of my favorite pizza still lingering in my mind as I watched the clock, counting down the minutes until the delivery. The sun had just set and the house was getting darker, adding a slightly eerie vibe to the atmosphere. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so when the streetlights flickered to life outside, it felt like the world was slowly fading away. As the minutes dragged on, the excitement turned into restlessness. I checked my phone for the delivery status, but it hadn't updated, which made me a little anxious. I was just about to call the pizza place when I heard a faint noise from outside. It sounded like footsteps crunching on gravel, but I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. I mean, who wouldn't get a little jumpy waiting for food? I turned the volume up on the TV trying to focus on the show, but the sounds outside became more pronounced. I could hear what seemed like someone walking around near my driveway. My heart rate picked up again. I thought maybe the delivery person had arrived but was just taking their time. Still, I felt uneasy. I peeked through the blinds, but the porch light cast long shadows and I couldn't see anything clearly. After a few more minutes of this eerie waiting game, I decided to grab my phone and check the delivery app again. It still showed out for delivery, which made me even more restless. I figured I'd head to the front door to see if I could catch a glimpse of the delivery car. As I approached the door, I swear I felt a chill run down my spine, and my instincts were screaming at me that something was off. I opened the door cautiously, peering out into the darkness. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears for any sign of movement. Just as I was about to turn back inside, I noticed a shadow moving at the edge of my driveway. My heart dropped. In the dim light, I could make out a figure standing there, definitely not the pizza delivery guy. It was a tall person just standing completely still facing my house. I thought, what in the world? Panic set in and I instinctively stepped back inside, closing the door quietly behind me. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend, letting them know I was feeling uneasy and asking them to stay on the line with me. My friend picked up and I explained what was happening, how I was waiting for pizza and now there was someone outside. I could hear my own voice shaking a bit, but they reassured me that it was probably just a neighbor or someone passing by. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. As I was talking, I suddenly heard a knock at the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. That's got to be the pizza, I thought, but then I remembered the figure outside. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the door, and then I carefully peered through the peephole. To my surprise, it was indeed the delivery guy. He looked a little confused, glancing around as if he sensed something was off too. I opened the door just a crack, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, sorry about the wait," I said, trying to act normal. But the delivery guy seemed a bit on edge too. He handed me the pizza, and as I was reaching for my wallet, I noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was worried about something behind him. It made me feel even more uneasy. I paid him quickly, thanked him, and shut the door almost as fast as I could. I locked the door and leaned against it, heart racing. I carried the pizza to the living room, but I was still on edge. The whole experience felt surreal. I finally settled down with my slice, but every little sound made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, despite being in my own home. After a while, I decided to finish my show, but I kept the lights on bright and the volume up. The pizza was delicious, but the entire time I felt like something was lurking just outside my window. It wasn't until I finally turned off the TV and headed to bed that I felt a sense of relief wash over me. So, I have to share this creepy experience I had while home alone in a cabin in the woods a few months back. I decided to take a little getaway to disconnect from everything, just me, the cabin, and nature. I arrived at this secluded spot, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature, and it felt like the perfect escape. The cabin was rustic and charming, with a cozy fireplace and a view that looked out over a serene lake. I was excited. The first day went great. I spent the day hiking, exploring, and just soaking in the peace and quiet. But as night fell, things took a turn. I lit a fire in the fireplace, settled in with some snacks, and started watching a movie on my laptop. The wind howled outside and the branches scratched against the windows, creating an ambience that was both cozy and a little unnerving. After a while, I started to hear some strange noises outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe some small critters rustling around. But then the sounds got louder, definitely not just a squirrel. My heart started to race as I realized that something large was moving around outside the cabin. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a deer or something. I even convinced myself to keep watching my movie because, what could really happen? But then I heard it, a deep, low growl that sent chills down my spine. My stomach dropped and I froze. I realized I was likely not alone. As I glanced out the window, my worst fears were confirmed. There, illuminated by the flickering light of the fire, was a massive bear lumbering around outside the cabin. My heart was pounding in my chest and I felt a mix of terror and awe. I knew there were bears in the area, but seeing one so close felt surreal. The bear seemed to be sniffing around, investigating the area. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do. Should I call someone? Make noise? Just stay still? All I could think about was the fact that I was in a remote cabin, completely alone, with a bear outside, and my only weapon was a can of bear spray that I had thankfully brought along. I tried to stay quiet, but the bear was clearly curious. It got closer to the cabin and I could see it pawing at the ground and sniffing around the porch. I held my breath, paralyzed with fear. I was torn between wanting to capture the moment on my phone and not wanting to make any noise that might provoke it. Eventually, it stood up on its hind legs, looking directly at the cabin. I felt like it could see right through me. After what felt like an eternity, the bear finally lost interest and wandered off into the woods. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and tried to calm my racing heart. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, jumping at every little sound, convinced that the bear might come back. The next morning, I cautiously stepped outside to assess the situation. There were clear paw prints all around the porch, and I couldn't help but laugh nervously at how close I had come to a bear encounter. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I definitely learned my lesson about solo trips in bear country. Next time I'll stick to a more populated area. Now every time I hear a rustling outside, I can't help but think of that night in the cabin, and I always make sure to have my bear spray within reach. So, I have to share this creepy experience I had while home alone a while back. It was one of those rare weekends where I had the whole house to myself. My family was out of town visiting some relatives for a couple of days, and I was looking forward to some peace and quiet. I had my dog, Max, a big, lovable golden retriever, to keep me company. Max has always been my loyal sidekick, and I felt reassured knowing he was there with me. The first couple of days were fantastic, just me, some snacks, and binge-watching my favorite shows. I settled into a cozy routine, making popcorn and curling up on the couch with Max by my side. We'd go for long walks during the day, and I'd always make sure to include a few extra treats for him. Everything felt perfect, but as the sun dipped below the horizon on the third night, things took an unexpected turn. I was settling in for the evening, getting cozy on the couch with Max sprawled out beside me, his soft fur warming my leg. We were halfway through a movie, the glow of the screen flickering in the dimly lit room, when I noticed Max starting to act a little weird. He was lying down but kept getting up, pacing around the living room and letting out low growls. His behavior was unusual. Max was usually a laid-back dog, content to relax and watch movies just like me. At first, I thought maybe he needed to go outside, so I took him out into the backyard. The night was clear, with the moon shining bright, casting an eerie light over everything. The stars twinkled above, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air. As soon as we stepped outside, Max started barking like crazy. He was going absolutely nuts, barking at nothing in particular. I looked around, but the yard was empty and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I tried to calm him down, kneeling beside him and speaking softly, but he wouldn't stop. His barking was loud and frantic, echoing in the stillness, and it sent a wave of unease through me. I figured maybe he heard some animal in the bushes or something, but the longer I stood there, the more I felt this creeping sense of dread. It was as if the night itself was alive with unseen threats. I called him back inside, hoping he'd settle down once we were back in the safety of the house. Once we were inside, Max seemed a little calmer, but he still kept glancing toward the windows and whining softly. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself he was just being a big baby. So I turned the movie back on and tried to focus, but every time I heard a faint sound, a branch cracking outside, the wind rustling the leaves, Max would perk up and start barking again. It was like he was on high alert, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This went on for a while, and I was starting to feel really uneasy. I thought about checking the locks on the doors and windows, just to reassure myself that everything was secure. As I moved around the house, Max followed me, still on edge, barking at seemingly nothing. I could feel the tension in the air, and it was making my skin crawl. Then something weird happened. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, when I heard a loud bang from the living room. My heart dropped, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I rushed back to see what had happened, half expecting to find a window blown open or something. But no, everything was as it should be, except for Max, who was now standing in front of the living room window, barking furiously at the darkness outside. I tried to get him to come away from the window, but he wouldn't budge. It was like he was fixated on something out there, something I couldn't see. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it outside, but I saw nothing. Just shadows dancing in the moonlight, creating shapes that seemed to shift and move as I stared. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. I decided to call my friend to come over. I needed someone else there to help shake off this sense of dread. While I was on the phone, I heard that loud bang again, this time followed by a soft scratching sound at the back door. I froze, and my friend could hear it through the phone. "What was that?" they asked, and I had no answer. My voice was barely a whisper as I told them I'd check it out. I slowly made my way to the back door, my heart pounding in my chest. So, I had one of the creepiest experiences of my life while home alone a few months ago. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind of night that feels perfect for curling up on the couch with a good show. I was deep in the grips of binge-watching some true crime documentary, classic setup for a horror moment, right? The rain was pouring outside, heavy and relentless, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves. The whole atmosphere felt a bit too silent, except for the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling around me. It gave me that eerie feeling you get when the world outside feels so chaotic, yet you're cocooned in your own little bubble. I was really getting into the show, completely engrossed in the chilling details and twists of the storyline, when I suddenly heard a faint scratching sound coming from the kitchen. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than the wind or perhaps the house itself making its usual settling noises. But then the scratching got louder, more insistent, like something or someone was actually trying to get in. My heart started to race. I was home alone, and the thought of a burglar or some creepy intruder sent me spiraling into full-on panic mode. I paused the show, my senses sharpening, and tried to listen more intently. The scratching continued, persistent and unnerving. It was definitely coming from the pantry, and I could practically feel my adrenaline pumping, my palms starting to sweat. I thought, okay, I can't just sit here. The fight or flight response kicked in, and I decided to confront whatever was making that noise. So I grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dimness of the house, and slowly made my way to the kitchen, feeling like I'd stepped right into a horror movie. As I inched closer to the pantry, the scratching intensified, echoing in my ears, and I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. My throat felt dry, and I took a deep breath to steady myself, trying to calm my racing heart. I swung the pantry door open, ready to confront whatever was lurking inside. My imagination was running wild. What if it was a masked intruder, or worse, something supernatural? I was prepared for anything at that moment. But instead I found Chipmunk. This little guy was trying to get into a bag of nuts I had left on the shelf. He looked just as startled as I was, freezing in place with wide eyes, as if he couldn't believe I had caught him in the act. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, ready to face off against a potential criminal, and it was just a hungry chipmunk trying to score a snack. We both stood there for a moment, staring at each other in disbelief. It felt surreal, like the tension of the moment suddenly evaporated into absurdity. The chipmunk, realizing he had been discovered, must have decided I wasn't going to help him out because he darted past me and out of the kitchen faster than I could react. I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous I felt, the sheer contrast between my fear and the reality of the situation. I went back to the couch, still shaking a little from the adrenaline but relieved that my intruder was just a cute little critter. The whole encounter seemed so absurd in retrospect. I couldn't stop chuckling at myself for having let my imagination run wild. Now, every time I hear a scratching sound in the house, I can't help but think of that chipmunk and wonder if it's just another little creature on the hunt for snacks. I've started keeping better snacks in the pantry, just in case my new furry friend decides to pay another visit. Who would have thought that a night filled with suspense and fear could end with such a hilarious twist? It's a reminder to not always jump to the worst-case scenario. Sometimes, it's just a little chipmunk looking for dinner. So, this one time I was home alone on a rainy night just chilling and binge-watching a show. You know the kind, one of those series that pulls you in so deep you forget about everything else. The wind was howling outside and the rain was pouring down, making everything feel extra eerie. It was one of those nights where the sound of the rain almost felt like it was wrapping around the house, creating this cocoon of isolation. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, feeling cozy and safe, completely absorbed in the plot twists and character drama. After a couple of episodes, I started to get hungry, so I decided to get up and grab some snacks from the kitchen. As I walked past the living room window, I glanced out, more out of habit than anything else, and that's when I noticed something, a shadow moving outside. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light or a tree branch swaying in the wind. You know how it is when your mind starts playing games with you, especially on a dark, stormy night. But then, as I squinted into the darkness, I saw a figure standing just a few feet away from the window, illuminated by the streetlight. It was a dude just standing there, staring right at me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was wearing a dark hoodie, and the way he was just standing there, motionless, felt incredibly unsettling. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I remember thinking, okay, this is just my imagination, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that he was really there, and that he was watching me. The seconds felt like hours as I stood there, trapped between wanting to look away and the instinct to keep my eyes locked on him. After what felt like an eternity, I finally mustered up the courage to grab my phone and shine a light outside. My hands were shaking and I could barely focus the beam as I pointed it toward the window. But when I did, he was gone. Just vanished, as if he had never been there at all. I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with disbelief. I rushed to check all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he still out there? Had I just imagined it? I couldn't help but feel like he was still lurking nearby, waiting for me to let my guard down. The whole atmosphere of the house shifted from cozy to claustrophobic, and I felt like I was being watched from every angle. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. I kept the lights on and stayed glued to my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, convinced that I'd see that creepy figure again. Every little noise made me jump, and I found myself peeking out the window every few minutes to check if he had returned. It was exhausting and terrifying. My imagination ran wild with thoughts of who he might be and what he wanted. Was he just a passerby, or was he up to something more sinister? Even after the rain stopped and the wind settled, I still felt on edge, like I was in a state of hyper-awareness. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. Now, I always double-check my windows when I'm home alone. I even keep a flashlight by my bed just in case, because you never know when a shadow in the night might turn out to be something more than just a trick of the light. So, I was home alone one night, catching up on some shows. It was late and the house was completely quiet. I decided to grab a snack from the kitchen. As I walked in, I noticed that one of the cabinet doors was slightly ajar. I could have sworn I closed it earlier, but I brushed it off as my imagination. After grabbing my snack, I went back to the living room. A few minutes later, I heard a soft thud coming from the kitchen. My heart started racing. I thought it was probably just a dish settling or something, but then I remembered I had left my phone charging on the counter. I walked back into the kitchen, and as I turned the corner, I saw that the cabinet door was now wide open. I felt a chill go down my spine. I closed the door, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then as I stood there, I heard what sounded like whispering coming from the hallway. I froze, listening intently, and the whispering got louder but was still unintelligible. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a kitchen knife just in case and slowly crept toward the hallway. As I reached the end, the whispering suddenly stopped and I was met with complete silence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before I finally decided to turn on all the lights. I spent the rest of the night with my phone in one hand and the knife in the other, convinced that something was lurking in the shadows. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night, but I never felt completely comfortable home alone after that.